So be it. What are you going to do?
So tell me, I was just thinking about this morning. When did you and our paths cross first? Was it through the Community Foundation?
Our paths crossed. Yeah, I think we became acquainted through the community. Although we didn't serve at the same time. I mean, but I think some events or whatever. Yeah. And then when there would be some annual meetings and joint meetings, I think, I got to meet you. Yeah. And
occasionally Sherry would send me over to the First Presbyterian Church, and you ran the church for years.
I did. The pastor took care of all of the pastoral duties, and I had responsibility for the finances, the facilities, and it was a large building. We had 9 different roofs and things like that. That was all and then I worked with the Presbyterians, they believe in a lot of committees. There were 17 committees. So I was the staff person that worked directly with, 5 or 6 of the committees, but then I was available to the other committees if they needed input, suggestions, or if they needed to take a look at the finances, what was available to them to spend and things like that. Yeah, it was something.
Your financial bent, was that natural? Is that something you grew up interested in, economics and all that?
Well, I was always good at math, and then in college, because I was a late bloomer. Well, because I come from an Italian family, and they felt you educate the boys first. The girls just went to college to major in marriage, so I didn't have access to college. But I did go in my early 30s after my kids were probably 8 to 10 years old, and I graduated from JCC, and then I went off to SUNY Fredonia. So I got in about 3 years, and then Sandy McConnell, the pastor, came to me and he said, Jeanette, we'd like to see you get your certification as a church business administrator. So that meant, and I said, well, I've got a family. I can't do both to pursue my bachelor's. I says, I'm probably about a year away, and also go for the certification, because it meant for 2 summers I had to go down to the Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia, and then I had to also go to conference every year it was about a week and a half to 2 weeks, because I went to 2 different conferences back to back. One was the Presbyterian, and the other one was on a national level. So, and I had to write a paper, and it had to be critiqued by Dr. Lacey down at the Richmond Seminary, and so I did get my certification. And I'm not real sure, but I think I'm the first one to receive a certification in church business administration in New York State, but I'm not real sure. If not first, close, because...
Let's go with that. I like that.
Yeah.
If you're not, we're going to tell everybody you are.
Well, I wasn't real sure from what I got from the conferences, because New York State, certified church business administrators, it wasn't popular. We, over in the Midwest and West and South, they had those humongous churches. They were into having someone in that role. But here they didn't, They had church secretaries, but they didn't have someone that took charge of everything other than but like Tom Sweet used to say, that there was some pastoring thrown into that, with me running the church, but it was interesting.
Your oldest brother, Carl Kappa, owned Crawford Furniture.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any encouragement that you would join that organization as sort of their CFO or in their financial department?
Well, I can remember David Dawson telling me because David chaired our finance committee, and so he said, I saw Carl on the golf course at Moonbrook yesterday. He said, I told him, hey, you got a sister that can run this company. And I was very close to Carl, but Carl came up through, although, you know, in his later years, he would ask me for my suggestions and all that, but Carl grew up with the tradition that it was a man's world, and, you know, but he recognized that, you know, that I had something going on up there, but, yeah.
So give me a little biography, maybe autobiography of your family. You know, how did they come over here? Did they immigrate from Italy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mother and father came here. You know, they weren't married at the time, separately. Immigrated to the United States, and they married and had 8 children. And Carl's was actually my half-brother, because my mother's first husband had passed away. And so, but my father became Carl's father. I think Carl was only 4 or 5 years old. So that basically was the only father he knew. And so we had 8, there were 6 brothers and 2 sisters. And all of my brothers are sweethearts. I always tell people, I couldn't have had better brothers. You know, they were very kind to me. Yeah, they were very protective. And being the baby of the group, of the whole family, my parents, by the time I came along, my mother was 37, my father 47, and they were tired after, you know, the children, having the other children. So that's how Carl became very protective of me. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of, most of my weekends with Carl and Kay growing up, because Rosemary, their daughter, there were only 9 years between us, so we were extremely close. Yeah. And then summers, most of the summer I spent up at their place. So he was like a second father to me, yeah.
Sort of like, frankly, Robert Jackson and his youngest sister, in many senses, there was a big gap. And in fact, he was became a legal guardian. Jackson became
did he really?
Legal guardian for Harold Adams' mother.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah.
Was that kind of gap? So what did your dad do for a living?
My dad worked at Dahlstrom's. Mm-hmm. You know, he worked in manufacturing, and quite honestly, he was one of the very few Italians that the Andersons hired down at Dahlstrom's, and he worked there for many years. And I know some of the men that worked down there after my father had retired. They they asked who I was and so on and so forth. He says, you know, remember your father. My father was a very proud man, and my father would walk to work, and he always had a sport jacket on and nice slacks, get to work, and then he'd change into his work clothes. And then at the end of the, this is what I've been told about, you know, from other workers. And then at the end of the day, he would go into the men's room and get cleaned up, put on his nice pair of slacks and his sport jacket, and walk back home again. Wow. Yeah, yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
Now, just for the camera, your dad's name was?
Sam Glotty.
Sam Glotty.
Or Samuel, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And I assume your mother was working at home, just keeping track of all the kids.
Yeah, yeah. You know, in those days, women, well, you know, she didn't anyhow. Yeah, she was busy taking care of us, driving us nuts. But she was a wonderful mother. But she was, you know, quite a demanding mother. Yeah, yeah.
To bring us somewhat current to our subject matter, the history of the Robert Jackson Center. We're 20 years old.
Unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe it. And it says here, Jeanette Kappa Carlson, one of 8 children. Carl Kappa, in declining health, sought the support of his sister, Jeanette, 15 years younger, with whom he had an unusually close bond. And, you know, you're in the book of life here.
Oh, and now that's incorrect. You know, I know a lot of people thought I was a Kappa because I was so close to but it's Jeanette Galati Carlson.
There you go.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Glad you corrected that.
Yeah, that was you know, but that's not unusual. There are a lot of people that think my maiden name was Kappa.
Well,
yeah.
You're so closely aligned. And you've heard the story about my interviewing Carl and had nothing at all to do with an interest. There was no Jackson Center, obviously, at the time.
Right.
About he was getting an award. He was getting an award by the Community Foundation, the Hamilton Award, and I just thought it was fascinating to interview him. And that's when this whole out of the blue interest that he had in Robert Jackson. Had he ever mentioned that to you? Had you ever heard that?
Never. And I can remember when I spoke to you after that interview, and I guess you asked him the question, did you have any heroes?
Yeah.
And he came out with, Robert Jackson. And so then afterwards you were talking to me about it, and I was surprised because he never mentioned that. But apparently he grew up, had great respect for him. Yeah.
The whole idea, I thought the question was going to lead to Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. No.
Jackson, because he had no knowledge that I was tinkering around with that. But anyways, that was surprising, and then his interest in trying to do something. And then you and I started talking quite a bit. Did you talk to him about that during that time period? Kind of, what are you thinking, Carl? I mean, just to get ideas? Well,
he, after that interview, and he says, I don't know, Jeanette, I don't know if I started something here. Well, then I don't know if it was a few weeks later or whatever, he called me up. He says, Jeanette. I said, what, Carl? He says, I had a call from Greg Peterson. And he says, Greg Peterson wants to meet with me. I says, oh, really? I says, what does he want to meet with you about? He says, well, I made that response, in my respect for Robert Jackson. He was one of my heroes. He says, he wants to talk to me about that. And I was amused by that. And I said, hey, Carl, okay. I says, that's great. I said, wonderful. I says, just remember, just hold on to your wallet when you walk in there. And he started laughing. So we were laughing about it. It was just, and so, and after that, it just, because of you motivating him and you just took hold of this whole Jackson, idea of having a center here. I think he really was very excited about being involved with that. In fact, I called you 2 or 3 times just to see how it was progressing, because he urged me. He'd say, Jeanette, call Greg and see where they stand on this. Because Carl knew he was dying. He had health issues, and he knew. And he knew that if he was going to do anything, he loved this community. If he was going to do anything, one last thing, because he did many things, one last thing for this community, that was his opportunity. Yeah.
Did he, part of that connection was Betty LeNay, Blackstone, sort of neighbors to Crawford? Not that I put them together that way, it just so happened, but did they know each other?
Oh, extremely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Their plants were next to each other, and from time to time, Carl and Reggie would have some issues, and they would finally sort it out, But they loved and respected each other. But Betty was a classmate of Carl's. She graduated from high school with him.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, and she, in fact, I remember Betty telling me when she, because of Carl, she was going to put in her money into the Jackson Center. And I remember her coming to me and she says, Jeanette, I want you to realize one thing. This money is not coming from the LeNay Foundation. She says, it's coming out of my personal money. She says, because I love Carl. And she says, and I just feel it's a wonderful idea. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
The image I have was of December 14th, just calling them together and having a chance to meet with Carl and Betty and Tom Cardman of the Gebby Foundation and Phil Morris. Those were the 5.
Yep.
I said, let's just talk conceptually if you're interested. And that to me was the acid test of asking him, could you come to a meeting, all of you, because they obviously knew what I was going to say something.
Right.
And the idea at the time was there was a Lucy building where they had exhibits on Pine Street. If you remember that.
I remember that. Yeah.
And there was an empty building next door,
Uh-huh.
kind of the same long, narrow building. And I thought, maybe we should do the same thing with Jackson. What do you think?
Yeah.
And essentially, on that day, all of them patted me on the head and said, let us know. They were cute. Just curious, did Carl talk to you at all about those early meetings?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And in fact, it was Carl that wanted me to become involved with the Jackson Center, and it was Carl that, when he was unable to attend, the first small board of directors that you had, he wanted me to sit in for him. And I would come and I would represent Carl and sit there, and then I would go to his home after the meeting and I would go over everything with him, and I kept him informed. And oh yeah, very much so. And Carl, did keep me informed on all of it. He didn't come to an awful lot of meetings because of his health, but fortunately you were able to get him at the start there. Yeah.
And I remember vividly, in fact, of when we invited everybody to come to the Scottish Rite Consistory. There was a period of time where it went from this little short building, narrow building, to Stan Weeks calling me and saying, hey, if you're interested, Jackson's a Mason, why don't you think of the consistory? Holy cow, that's a whole different from here to a 19,000 square foot building.
Yeah.
And then to actually sign a contract to keep us and with no money. I mean, I had nothing.
I know. I mean, you're a gutsy guy, I'll tell you.
And it was in my name. I never told Cindy that either.
Oh, it's a good thing you didn't.
There was no center. It didn't exist.
No, I know.
But to have the magic moment was when we came to this consistory, and it was Betty and Carl, Harold Adams. I invited Harold.
I remember that.
Dan Bratton. I just had lunch with him to talk about baseball.
Yeah.
So they're all kind of there, and I'm talking a little bit about, hey, this building might be available. And that's when Carl jumped in and said, I'm in.
Yeah.
And then Betty, the image I have is her sitting next to Carl saying, with tears in her eyes, frankly, if you're in, I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got, whoa, this wasn't, and they used numbers.
Oh, yes, they did.
$500,000.
Yeah.
I didn't, well, great.
Yeah. I wasn't at that particular meeting. I think I started coming right to the meetings just right after that. And but I know when he called me, and I says, wonderful, Carl, when he told me, and like I say, it was great for Carl because it gave him that one last thing that he could do for the community. So it worked out well.
And we took a tour. And that was cool. We all went downstairs and saw the area where there was the allegedly Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
But the real thing, we went down in the kitchen, and the kitchen at the time had stoves and gas, and it was a typical kitchen. But there was an incinerator there, just an incinerator exposed, and it just said Jackson on it.
Oh, did it really?
Yeah. Carl says, look it. It's meant to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was the name of the...
Isn't that something?
Crazy stuff. Remember.
Oh, I'll tell you, it really is amazing how that all came together, thanks to you. But I was pleased for Carl. I wished he had lived longer so he could have seen, more of the events that were held and so forth. But it was not meant to be. But
well, I was so thrilled because we knew his health was declining.
Yeah. And
you did attend those various meetings, but we made that decision to name the theater and to be able to have he and Kay and everybody show up at that presentation.
I remember.
That we had boarded announced it, and I think he was genuinely pleased.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, Carl was thrilled about it. And like I say, I would have to keep him updated as to the progress because he was so anxious. It was almost as if he wanted to see it completed, before he passed on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we had our first big event May 1st, and we took stuff down to the hospital.
Hospital. He was in the hospital. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It was, it's amazing when you look back on it, and it doesn't seem possible. It's 20 years. Oh my gosh, time goes by.
Well, you lived through this, and I want to get your reflections because you not only then became board member, secretary, treasurer. Essentially, you're the eyes and ears of Carl post-mortem, and kept us on the straight and narrow, I must tell you.
I'm a taskmaster.
While Raleigh and I were flying 10,000 feet, you would bring us down to earth and say, wait a minute, where's the money?
Exactly, yeah.
Do you have any kind of anecdotes of, things that maybe you and Raleigh would talk about? Because we did a lot of construction during that time period.
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot going on. And it was fortunate that we did receive some grants from the state, thanks to Kathy. And then with Carl and Betty's money, it allowed you to purchase the building and pay for, the initial repairs. Because that building needed an awful lot done to it, a lot. And so, I mean, it was a good thing to be involved with. And I can remember, as an anecdote, when I was keeping all of the financial records, I had big worksheets. I didn't have it on the computer or anything, because I really. At the church, I had secretaries that would put it on the computer for me. I mean, I had a lot of knowledge about it, but not, spreadsheets and all that. So I had it on worksheets, and then gradually, we did have BWB did our accounting for us, and I think that was after a couple of years. But yeah, it was quite an event.
Well, our first balance sheet was fantastic. It had Carl's contribution of $400,000, I think at the time. Betty's $500,000,
right?
And then Gabby shortly thereafter. And,
yes.
And now, when I reflect on it, they give us operating money.
Yep, I remember that.
That piece, I didn't fully appreciate the money, $500,000. But I didn't appreciate when they said, well, it's for operating money, as if that's a restriction.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. God. Now today, you can't get operating money.
Exactly.
To sell your soul.
They usually want a capital project.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that balance sheet initially was pretty good.
Yeah, exactly. No, it certainly helped an awful lot. Yeah. So.
But you had a chance also to work with Raleigh and to work with, of course, Randy Sweeney and Don Bloomquist, because he was the contractor guy. So, do you have any reflections on those guys?
I think all three of them wonderful men, and Randy Sweeney, as you know, he's one of my favorite guys, and then Raleigh. I mean, just very knowledgeable men, but kind men, and then we had Don Bloomquist with Code. He was a take charge man, but he was basically a very nice man, and he really was interested in the Jackson Center. And I know from time to time, Raleigh and Don would kind of get into it. They didn't kind of agree on things, so I'd have to try to be the peacemaker between the two of them. I said, well, Raleigh, Don, he's got to do it this way. And I'd go to Don and I'd say, well, Raleigh, as the executive director, so, but they're all great men. I was very fortunate to be able to work with them. Yeah.
Well, only now, when you look at it 20 years of hindsight, nobody had an ego. I mean, their word was the only word, and they all had skill sets, and they sort of used. We were able to get them into their comfort zone, and there was a great montage of good folks who could make that happen.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's why it all worked. You know, I know that, you know, they put many hours into it, and you know, as our leader, and so forth. I mean, everybody put a lot of hours into making the Jackson Center a success. And so it's great to see that, you know, it worked.
Well, during that time, we all had a chance to meet some notables that we probably would have never met in our lifetime.
Oh.
Rehnquist and all the law dialogues and the prosecutors and all that stuff. Did you get a chance to really meet and get a sense of any particular one of those?
You know, had a number of events, and a couple of the times I got to sit at the table with one of the clerks for Robert Jackson. Very interesting, down-to-earth men. You know, you kind of, you're in awe of someone that has a history like that, but very down-to-earth, and I really enjoyed it. You know, they were great people, and I'm glad you took the opportunity to have a lot of them visit here in Jamestown, and they were able to share their stories. It was great. Yeah.
And during your time, we had, of course, Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Exactly, I remember that. And I think I can remember Chief Justice Rehnquist. I guess he was still smoking at the time, and they had to take him to the upstairs of the Jackson Center. He had a quick fix, you know. That was fun.
Well, two quick stories on that line. I did not know he smoked.
Yeah.
And yet they built into the schedule. We had a book like this. Time, you know, basically 10 minutes. Rehnquist time. I didn't know that meant smoking time.
Yeah.
So when I was on the plane, I'll never forget that, when I first got the indication that he wanted time in Raleigh's office, because that's where he was going to be,
right,
to have a drag.
Right.
And my only reaction was, we had a smoke alarm.
Yeah.
In Raleigh's office.
I wasn't thinking of that.
Me neither, until all of a sudden we're in a plane with him. Nicest guy. I mean,
oh yeah.
He was a grandfatherly guy with my daughter and myself. But I'm thinking, oh my God, he's just before the crowd's all gonna be there, he'll be smoking and the alarm will go off.
Right.
And so I called as soon as I got in the car, Raleigh. I said, I don't know how you do it. Shut it off.
Shut it off. Isn't that something? So he was downstairs, because I thought, you know, they had said something, well, maybe we can take him. So it must be he ended up in Raleigh's office then.
Raleigh's office.
Okay.
And then we went to Chautauqua.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, we had dinner at
yeah.
Athenaeum Hotel. And there he needed time for a smoke. So it was a break. So he'd get there, half an hour, then he'd go downstairs.
Yeah.
Somebody forgot his cigarettes, or he forgot his cigarettes.
Oh dear.
So the sheriff had to, because there's no place on the grounds you can buy.
Exactly.
Had to fly up to Tops, get cigarettes, bring them back. He could smoke, and then once he had that, then he'd go downstairs. So we had everybody waiting downstairs.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody.
Oh,
I think 300 people to see him.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that story. That's interesting.
I'm not sure I should have said that. But anyways,
no, but you know, hey, everybody's human, you know.
Yeah.
So it's one of his things, and so. But he was a great man. He was, you know. I think I was introduced to him, but that was the extent of it. I didn't really have opportunity to really talk to him. Yeah.
So it was this is great. And during the construction phase, because I know you had to probably interface not only with the contractor because they wanted money, but was there? Did you feel like you personally were like a general contractor at some point, having to look at the invoices, or was that Raleigh did that?
No, I would, you know, check that all out. I mean, I felt that was my responsibility. Raleigh had, you know, other things that he would, I mean, he was certainly involved to some extent, but no. And then we also had to, we had to submit the invoices to the state after the project had been completed, whatever the grant was being given for. Then they would send us the funds. So I had to kind of watch the funds that we had in banks and so forth to make sure that we had the money to carry us, because some of these contractors would need some money before we got our grant money. So, that was a challenge, just, trying to do that.
Yeah,
But
I forgot about that,
yeah. But so
Did Don or any of those guys ever kind of mark the receipts paid in anticipation, even though they didn't get paid?
Right.
Just to keep the ball moving?
I don't think we ever did that.
Yeah, wow.
No, I don't think we ever did that. Yeah, no.
I commend you.
Yeah, we had a certain amount of monies at that time, and so we just had to keep our eye on it. And then when a certain portion was completed, we were able to send that invoice to the state, and then they would send a part of the grant money. Yeah, that was quite a challenge at that time, but
Well, that's a science. Congratulations.
yeah, but it worked. It worked.
Because I don't remember us ever getting a line of credit from a bank where we actually had to draw down a building line of credit. I don't remember that.
We did get a line of credit after many of these things had been done. At some point, while I was still on the board, we did get a $50,000 line of credit.
Just to have operating line of credit.
Just in case.
Yeah.
It was just in case. But as long as I was involved, we never had to draw on it. We never had to draw on
You
it.
realize how many not-for-profits can say that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, it worked. And like you said, I think that we were very fortunate. We had different people with different skill sets, and I think that's what brought it all together too. Yeah.
One of those, I talked to Raleigh at length earlier this week and about his relationship with Bill Parman and Bill Parman's relationship with Shelley Silver, and how we were able to get earmarks that you can't get anymore. Those days of
That's
getting
right.
capital money, which was there, nothing wrong obviously, but Bill Parman had to be convinced, Raleigh had to convince Bill
Yeah.
that was something that was worthy, and he did. And Bill's very happy, by the way. I've talked to him.
Is he?
Yeah, very happy.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I remember Raleigh saying that he had to, sit with Parman and, and try to convince him of what an asset it was going to be to the community and all that. And unfortunately, we were able to get some money.
On money, and this is a story I'm not sure I should tell, but let's tell it anyways. Pat McGee, who you remember, was our
Yes.
state senator, passed away.
Right.
And there was a special election. And it was Nancy Barger against State Assembly person Kathy Young.
Yep.
And we'd been working with Pat McGee. She'd given us some funds. And Kathy was running, and then I got a call from her manager on a Monday and saying, Kathy's going to be in town on Thursday. Could she deliver a check to you for $150,000?
I remember that.
Do you think you could come up with something what you would use it for? Of course, yes and yes.
Yeah.
And the only criteria, and it's just a photo op, was to make sure Betty Linnae showed up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And remember,
Yeah.
we made the calls and to get our board members there,
Yeah.
and just, hey, and we did it, of course. There was Betty front and center, and
Yeah.
you and others.
Yeah.
But that was a wild.
Kathy Young was marvelous also.
Absolutely.
I had a great deal of respect for Kathy, and she came to the Jackson Center a number of times actually, and but we were very fortunate she was in office at that time. Yeah.
We were blessed to have Bill in the Assembly, Kathy
Yeah.
in the Senate, because they were in the majority on both sides,
Right.
and
It worked.
it did.
Yeah.
It did work.
It worked.
And now you have a facility and now they're finishing up the last $1.5 million renovation,
Right.
which they'll open up soon. But because of people like Carl, Betty, and your diligence, I might underscore that for the camera, diligence. To this date, we don't have any debt.
It's fantastic, really. When you think about it, I mean, it wasn't easy, but I think with everyone working at different ways of promoting the Jackson Center and so on and so forth, we just got the support that we needed, which was great. It was great.
As you look back now at 20 years, do you have a sense of Carl's legacy in all of this here?
Oh, well, I think that, Carl's legacy is that fortunately he was able to provide, some of the money, some major money, so that we could get started, and I just know that if he were living, he'd be extremely proud of it. And with Robert Jackson being his hero, I'm sure Carl would have a big, wide grin on his face. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure even a bigger grin knowing that the legacy continued through you and your wonderful stewardship on many fronts for the Jackson Center, and it continues today. And you're one of the big ambassadors for us, and and there's a big YouTube video of you being honored at the Jackson Center in 2011. And
yeah, that was, that's when I retired from the board, correct? Yeah. And I had been involved with the Jackson Center basically so it was about 12 years. And, and I've been one, it wasn't that I wasn't interested in, in the Jackson Center. It was just that I've always been one that felt that fresh eyes and fresh ears are good for any organization. After a while, the same people, they have the same ideas, and I just thought it was time. I thought, I was able to sit there for all those years and represent Carl and try to do what I needed to do to be a part of the organization, but it was time. And it's worked out. And
well, I think we all have reached a point, and even myself, where I've been walking back for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'll be off the board. I mean, in fact, I'm not going to go away, but
No, well, that's it.
But that's just part of that. And
yeah.
Though I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question of: was there something humorous or unusual, an incident where you'd say Carol Drake, Becky Robbins, Fran Galbato, Jim Oria did something that you recall that was funny, hilarious, unusual, anything that jumps to mind?
Not that I recall. I mean, we had our fun. I mean, and all of the women that you mentioned were great ladies. And Fran Galbato, as a volunteer, I mean, she put, many hours into that place. And so, we really can't forget that. And Carol Drake, as the secretary, I mean, she was just the right personality at the right time. And Becky, and really, I just felt privileged to be able to work with all of these people. They were just wonderful. I think we were also serious in what our mission was, that we had our fun in between, but I don't know that anything that really stands out. But we just had a job to do, and we all did it, so. And
you did it very well, and I personally want to thank you for everything and continue to do. And come December 14th, we'll have our 20th. We'll have an event at the center and rolling out a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Isn't that wonderful to think that 20 years have gone by and the Jackson Center is still there, and hopefully it's receiving the support that it needs and so forth. It's wonderful.
And it's under great new leadership, and they got new, talk about fresh eyes, younger and diverse.
Yeah.
It's terrific.
Yeah, that's great. And we thank you. And, I mean, it wouldn't have happened, Greg, without you. I tell people that. And so you've got to have that person that becomes the leader and has the ideas and goes out there and pursues them. So we were very fortunate with that too.
With that, I better end, yeah.
Exactly.